today. Before we start, I want to outline the purpose of today's forum. This is an opportunity for the university community and the public to provide input as we work to develop and implement a plan to improve human subject research practices here at the University of Minnesota. I want to thank faculty and staff who conduct and support clinical research in order to discover knowledge and improve lives. The Board of Regents stands with you. The rich discussion we're now having within the university community will make us stronger and ensure that the university is a national model for research and discovery. With regard to process, today's forum is intended to be a 1-hour public hearing. The board and the president will be receiving testimony only from you, the university community, and members of the public. The board will discuss and take action on an implementation plan at its meeting on June 12, 2015. We have 15 speakers who are signed up, first come, first served basis, and Mr. Steves, Executive Director of the Board of Regents, will now draw an additional 5 names from this bowl to fill the remaining time.
So we have Colleen Traxler, that will be number 16. Kathy Swanson, number 17. Terry Caraway, number 18. Patrice Nerad, number 19. And Nancy Raymond, number 20.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. He will call your name when it's your turn to speak. Please come to the podium at the presenters table, and for the record, provide your name and affiliation, student, faculty, member, staff. The microphones do not need to be adjusted. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes. You'll get a warning light when 1 minute is left and another light when your time is up. If you have handouts, please give them to a member of the board staff so they can be distributed to the regents following the meeting. I think we're ready to start, so Mr. Steves, would you call the first name?
First name is David Thone.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Thone, and I'm a clinical trial participant. I'm here to talk about the clinical trial that I participated in at the University of Minnesota, specifically the Schultz Diabetes Institute, 7 years ago. In the past 7 years, I've experienced outstanding health, no issues whatsoever, and a complete, indescribable increase to the quality of my life, including my family and those around me. In 1987, at the age of 23, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Since I was afraid of developing complications, I took very good care of myself using insulin, exercise, diet, and nutrition to manage this awful disease. While I avoided the complications, I did develop a side effect that's called hypoglycemia unawareness. This is the inability to detect a low blood sugar. Usually when one has a low blood sugar, there are signs and symptoms, but I had none of those. So a low blood sugar for me will lead to sometimes unconsciousness, possibly a seizure, requiring help from others. That help often came from my wife and our kids, and we had to teach our sons as early as age 2 or 3 what a low blood sugar was and what they needed to do. Seizures in the middle of the night were not uncommon, and I have many other stories of suffering hypoglycemia in public or while traveling for work. Fortunately, I never hurt anyone else, although I did often hurt myself physically, mentally, and emotionally. I discovered that the Schultz Diabetes Institute was doing clinical trials to cure hypoglycemia unawareness through the use of islet transplants. I applied, I qualified, I participated, and the results were immediate. My insulin needs dropped immediately, and my body reacted to blood sugar levels, high or low, just like a person without diabetes. I considered myself cured. I was able to do normal things, like take our 2 kids to the Boundary Waters for a week. The impact on my physical and mental well-being are indescribable, and the impact has also been great of those around me. My wife, our sons, our neighbors, our friends, coworkers, even strangers. When people ask me how I'm doing, we say in our household, Dave's health is really boring, and boring is really great. During my time at the U, I never felt compromised or uninformed. I never felt like they needed to get this process done in order to add statistics to a database. I never felt like I was in harm's way. And on occasions where there was a potential issue, everything was stopped, I was informed, and a new path or direction was explored. The main goal was always my health and well-being. Finally, people who hear my story are shocked and amazed at the life I now live without type 1 diabetes. A comment I often hear, one which I used to say to myself, is that I don't understand a life of not having to worry about diabetes. The Schultz Diabetes Institute is providing great hope and anticipation of a cure for type 1 diabetes. Thank you for allowing me to come in today and share my story.
Joseph Neglia.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Joe Neglia. I'm the chair and a professor of pediatrics and a pediatric oncologist here at the University of Minnesota. Over the 20 years here, 20 plus years, I've put hundreds of children on clinical trials for cancer. I'd like to read excerpts to the Board of Regents from an open letter from the faculty of the University of Minnesota Medical School. This letter has now been signed by over 270 of our faculty. It is a concern of the signed faculty of the University of Minnesota Medical School that in the search for justice for a young life lost, we may inadvertently harm future patients who could otherwise benefit from ethically designed and morally implemented clinical research trials here. Clinical research is born out of suffering. A doctor is frustrated that she cannot help a patient, a parent agonizes over the child's illness, a child loses a parent to an incurable disease. And research begins to look for ways to help, to increase the lifespan, and to make the incurable curable. In clinical trials, we carefully monitor the effects of treatment, hoping to prove that the treatment is both safe and effective. Sometimes these trials show promise, and we can move closer to a cure. Sometimes they don't, and we must learn what we can and move on. The risks involved in this kind of research must be carefully taken, with the parties informed and risks minimized as much as possible, and the participants having control over whether or not to participate. There is another risk, and a very real one, that if mistakes are so dramatically punished, everyone will become afraid to make them, or worse, if they make them, to not admit them. In order to be a world-class research institution, we need to take risks, along with the accompanying inevitable failures, and to acknowledge and learn from our mistakes. The university administration now in place was not a party to the original tragedy, and one can hope that they, of all people, have now learned significant lessons about the importance of transparency, of proper oversight, and the need for vigilance in the management of clinical trials. We believe that the most productive and least disruptive course of action is to face and acknowledge the problems of the past so that we can evaluate the present and create a better future. We are confident in the leadership of Drs. Kaler and Jackson and have already seen the impact of this leadership. We as faculty are committed to doing the research necessary for today's and tomorrow's patients with the highest levels of ethos. Our signatures affirm our confidence in our leadership and our desire to do our best for all patients within and outside of research. And copies of the full letter have been given to the administrators, so thank you.
Nan Dixon.
I'm from the community and an employment. I have 37 years of employment in the clinical laboratories of the University of Minnesota Medical Center, with a husband that graduated from the U and a child currently at the U. I am also the mother of a child that has a serious psychotic illness. My grandmother was likewise stricken with this disease in the early 1930s when her only treatment option was residency at St. Peter's State Hospital, living there the rest of her life into the 1960s. Another diagnosed family member spent years living between the streets and hospital in the 80s and 90s, lacking treatment options. My child was diagnosed at the U in 2008 and continues to be treated by the UMP psychiatric team. It has taken the past 7 years to achieve stability that includes an apartment and small job. Thankfully, there have been far more treatment tools to work with than were available to my older relatives, and we have needed them all. We are fairly certain our child would not be living, much less at this point of success, without the specialized treatment received here, and the necessary research that made these treatments available. In all of our treatment years since 2008, research trials have repeatedly surfaced, and always, 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 we as parents were included in the discussion. I have always felt safe navigating the system, saying no if needed, and included as an integral part of the team, especially when my child was cognitively impaired. I have also needed at times to allow my adult child the choice to make treatment decisions, not always easy for a mom. Treatment options were not always successes, but in the medical care of a disease that's still minimally understood, they were valuable steps in finding a path forward. I acknowledge that each family experiencing a serious illness without a clear-cut cure brings a different perspective to the table. We desperately need continued research to find effective treatments across all illnesses at our academic health center, and that will necessarily include human subjects. We are certainly not there yet in curing or even managing many, many illnesses that stubbornly remain a mystery, as I see daily in my work at the medical center. Our family has a vested interest in the university's reputation and its research mission. I welcome this current opportunity to reduce the polarized climate that has developed. I am hopeful that with review and open, honest dialogue, human research safety across the U can be strengthened, along with the U as a whole. And from another mom, she is the mom no one wants to be because she is the parent to an adult son with psychosis. I'm just kind of pulling from her thing. In a real sense, every psychosis patient is undergoing their own drug trial because only experience can tell you if a prescription will be effective. And her family feels they owe a huge debt to other patients who lent their experience in controlled studies to shorten their son's journey to recovery. Her eyes are wide open to the criticisms of the U drug trials, but she wants to know her son would likely not be alive today if it hadn't been for that. Thank you.
John Wygant.
I'm a professor at the U in physics, and I'm also a big user of the medical facilities of the university. My wife is a professor of physics also, and she was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of B-cell lymphoma. She had 2 bone marrow transplants over a period of 2 years with extensive chemotherapy, and none of those knocked down the lymphoma. The mortality rate, you're not supposed to look up on the internet. We did anyway. 70% fatalities in 3 years. After the last bone marrow transplant that was not successful, the clinician looked at the biopsy that she had and found that her lymphoma had 2 genetic markers on it, and she knew that across the building there was another researcher who had developed a new generation of drugs that keyed directly on those biomarkers. And she enrolled in a drug trial, phase 1 drug trial for that drug. She was fully informed of all of the dangers. She was number 20 in the world to receive this drug. It knocked the lymphoma dead. So we went, the first group of treatments took it down, the tumors down by 75%. The second, we went back to the FDA to get a second treatment, and this drug completely wiped out the tumor. She's been in remission for over a year and a quarter right now. So we don't know where the situation is going, but that's where we are relative to that. We're very happy about drug trials using human beings, as you might guess. The second point is, I have a son who has had lifelong depression, and I also have a daughter who underwent adult onset schizophrenia here when she was 18 years old a number of years ago. She has been treated by Dr. Schultz's team at the psychiatric unit, and we are very grateful for all of the care that we have received from his team. We have participated in the First Episodes Parents Group, which is a group of parents that meets and consults with a psychiatrist once per week. It's been doing this for 6 years now. The parents learn about what the treatments are. They're able to complain and communicate back and forth between the people who are giving the treatment and what they're doing. They learn about the life experiences of all the other people who are undergoing this incredibly stressful and kind of tragic disease. And so I think that it hasn't been discussed what an important kind of role that this group plays in the treatment, it's revolutionary in a sense because it's been copied around the world. A lot of other places and in Europe have used it. Okay, and so we're very thankful for what Dr. Schultz has done. Thank you.
William Messing.
So, I'm from the mathematics department. Since the first 4 speakers have been upbeat, I want to very briefly remain upbeat as well. On Monday at the Mayo Auditorium, there was a academic health center town hall meeting. The final speaker, his name is Andrew Urveg. He's a freshman at the university, and he made a very strong impression on me and a number of others. Leigh Turner had spoken a little before, and the direct question that Urvig put to Brooks Jackson and Brian Herman was, why do you not play straight and answer Leigh Turner's question? Why doesn't Taylor answer the question? I think that's a very encouraging sign. The university has a good future if we have more freshmen who can think for themselves. So now I'm going to somewhat change the subject. May 19th, 2011, there was a faculty consultative committee announcement concerning academic freedom and how the university stands higher than Everest with regard to being a beacon, to use President Kaler's expression, the northern light in terms of academic freedom. And this letter, which is available online, mentioned specifically a bioethicist without naming him. I had occasion to meet at 11:30 this morning with a former chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee. And I mentioned this letter. And I said, I think the bioethicist is Carl Elliott. And he said, I'm sure you're right. I said, it's my impression that Morrill Hall would love to be able to fire both Carl Elliott and Leigh Turner. He responded, that's certainly true. So I think there's a problem at the university when tenured faculty members are investigated and the administration, Morrill Hall, the university attorney goes after them. This is not what academic freedom is about, and I think...
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Naomi Sheeman.
Thank you. I'm a professor in the philosophy department, and I'm the president of our university's AAUP chapter charged with protecting academic freedom, and I'm also a member of the implementation team. Now, the implementation team, we're told, is doing really good work and doing something that will help make the university and university research better. I certainly hope, and so far have reason to believe, that this is true. The work is important, it needs doing, and it's good for the university. But how did we get to the point of doing this? Well, it came about as a result of reports that were done because of a resolution at the Senate, and I was one of the senators who called for that. And we did that because we stood by and we listened to, in particular, Professors Carl Elliott and Leigh Turner. They were not fired, they were not officially punished, but they were marginalized. People were saying very bad things about them. They were certainly not being taken seriously and listened to by the administration or by the Board of Regents. They were met with denial and with stonewalling. But it's because of the work that they did that we have the implementation team that people are saying is a good thing and will be useful to the university. We've heard very, very stirring stories about the value of scientific research. Those stories are true. There's wonderful research going on here. But in a certain deep, important sense, they're beside the point. We can stipulate that that's true, but that's all the more reason why we need to be concerned with the integrity, the honesty, the ethics, the responsiveness of the research that goes on here, holding researchers and all the rest of us to the ideals of this university, ideals that we are all stewards of, but especially the administration, especially the Board of Regents, are supposed to be stewards of those ideals. And as we know from the reports that came in, what grounds the work of the Implementation Committee is that those ideals have not always been adhered to, and the story needs to be told honestly, including by the Board of Regents. You need to acknowledge you slipped up. Things got passed by that should not have been. Bad things happened and were not attended to. People who tried to whistleblow were not listened to. That story needs to be told honestly so that we can move forward and support the terrific life-saving research that goes on in that university. Those of us who are calling attention to this are not anti-science. We do not want to bash the research. We want to support it.
Thank you.
Carl Elliott.
Hi, Carl Elliott. I'm a professor in the Bioethics Center here, and so far the only person who's been disciplined in the Markinson case. Over the past 3 years, I've filed about a dozen complaints about research misconduct here. I filed them to the IRB, to the Research Integrity Office, to the Research Subject Advocate, you name it. No matter what office I submit my complaints to, the answer is always one of two things. One, there is no merit to your complaint, or two, that's not our problem, take it somewhere else. That's it. Dan Markinson, not a problem. Incompetent study coordinator, not a problem. Seroquel in the oatmeal at a sex offender facility, not a problem. Last year, I filed a complaint about the treatment of a patient named Robert Huber, who's given me his permission to give his name here today. Robert's story was very similar to Dan Markinson's. Psychosis, locked ward, pressure to join a study, dangerous drug, very bad side effects. He went to the press. The university's response was to try to discredit him by accessing his mental health records. The statement that the university issued was, Robert has a history of mental illness and head trauma and alcoholism, and he can't really be trusted. Well, yesterday, after waiting 16 months, Robert finally got an answer from the IRB here to his complaint. It was a 1.5-page letter saying that his complaints essentially had no merit. It took the university 16 months to investigate that. They hired an outside company at a cost of over $20,000. In no point during that period did they even bother to meet with Robert to hear his story. Now, you might ask, how does this happen? I mean, how is it that every single office at the university marches in lockstep with one another, no matter who's running those offices? How is it that they always find that no matter what the complaint is, there are no ethical problems? Well, I'll tell you why. It's fear. People at this university see what happens to those people who speak out or dissent from the people in charge. They get crushed. They get disciplined, or they get smeared, like Robert Huber, or they get sued, like Mary Weiss. And the people responsible for that fear are the very ones that you have put in charge of fixing the problems. The administration here, and especially the general counsel's office a few floors below you. And until you fix that fear, you will have fixed nothing. Thank you.
William Gleason.
Members of the Board of Regents and other interested people. I am a retired medical school faculty member, Bill Gleason. Since 2009, I have made about 100 blog posts on the Markinson tragedy. From the call for this meeting, quote, "The public forum is an opportunity to provide input to the board. The board will not engage in a discussion or a question and answer session," unquote. Such opportunities are sadly rare. Apparently, this is a way for the public to vent, the Regents nominally having done their duty to obtain public input. We are at this meeting today because previously you have not paid attention to the community in the Markinson scandal. You have ignored them many times. Your lack of action is very disappointing to me as an alumnus. Perhaps you have depended too much on the advice of the stonewalling general counsel's office. For example, in 2010, you dismissed the request of 8 U of M bioethicists to ask for an outside review of the Markinson tragedy. As I wrote 5 years ago in MinPost, quote, "I am deeply disappointed in this head-in-the-sand behavior. It is not going to do our reputation any good. Major changes are needed in the Department of Psychiatry and elsewhere in the med school to restore our good name. A tiny fraction of people are involved in this unethical behavior. The great majority of the U of M docs are wonderful people. It is sad to see them pilloried for the gutless behavior of a few, and now the Regents." Another example shows how out of touch the Regents appear to be. Former Governor Carlson wrote a letter to the legislature and noted that he had brought his concerns about research misconduct to the board chairman. Beeson's response was that it has not risen to the level of our concern. When pressed on the negative publicity, he could only offer that it has not hurt our brand. To the contrary, our brand has obviously been hurt. These examples cause me to ask, is no one on the Board of Regents going to take any responsibility for this situation? Is anyone going to apologize for multiple mistakes and say that they are sorry? Finally, I point out something obvious. You don't put the fox in charge of the henhouse. People responsible for the Markinson fiasco are now being put in charge of fixing it. And we are being asked to trust them? This situation is ethically the same as putting Dr. Furcht on the panel to draw up conflict of interest rules. This was done at our university, and how has that worked out? 3 minutes is not much time. I guess that's the point.
Lee Turner.
Lee Turner, Center for Bioethics and Associate Professor there. On March 19th, the Legislative Auditor released its report on the Markinson case. The review offers a damning indictment of senior university officials' refusal to investigate ethical issues related to Dan Markinson's death. According to the report, the Markinson case raises serious ethical issues and numerous conflicts of interest which university leaders have been consistently unwilling to acknowledge. They've repeatedly claimed that clinical research at the university meets the highest ethical standards and dismissed the need for further consideration of the Markinson case by making misleading statements about past reviews. This insular and inaccurate response has seriously harmed the University of Minnesota's credibility and reputation. President Kaler made two false statements in his reply to the Legislative Auditor's report. He stated the universities relied on the external agencies charged with investigating such matters, the FDA, Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, and the Hennepin County District Court, to inform us of any deficiencies in our processes and practices and affirm our compliance with laws and regulations. The university did not influence any of the external reviews, and none of those previous reviews reported regulatory violations or alerted us to ethical breaches. If these external reviews were flawed, we were not aware of those shortcomings. In fact, Ethical breaches in Markinson's care were addressed in 2009 when the Minnesota legislature passed Dan's Law. Serious ethical breaches in the Markinson case were documented in a report issued by the Minnesota Board of Social Work in 2012. From 2008 to the present, these ethical violations were reported by news media and scholarly publications. These breaches were first brought to Eric Kaler's attention before he became president. 2 years ago, in a series of letters to him, I provided a detailed account of these violations and urged him to support calls for an independent investigation. He refused. Now he claims that hindsight's 20/20. University presidents are not paid for their perfect hindsight. For 4 years, President Kaler has repeatedly displayed indifference to the evidence-based analyses that were provided to him in conjunction with requests to investigate possible research misconduct. President Kaler also made a false statement when he claimed that he was unaware of significant flaws in the external reviews that he used to defend his refusal to investigate the Markinson case. He was alerted to serious flaws in the FDA's investigation, warned about the risks of relying upon the brief letters issued by the medical practice, advised of the perils of relying upon a summary judgment in which a judge sided with the university's claim that it was immune from litigation, and told that senior university officials were making claims about investigations that had never occurred. Now President Kaler wants to pretend that he was unaware of the well-documented problems with these reviews. Why is President Kaler not being held accountable for his failure to investigate credible allegations of research misconduct? The most plausible answer is that you, the Regents, who ought to hold President Kaler responsible, were also alerted, did nothing, and are as blameworthy as he is. I brought a report documenting everything I've said. It contains a summary of the letters and the letters themselves. I'll leave them over here. I think they're worth reading. I've also brought copies for anyone else who's here today and who'd like to have access to them. Thank you.
Kaz Nelson.
My name is Kaz Nelson, psychiatry faculty. I'm also an alumna of the U of M Morris, the U of M Medical School, and the U of M Psychiatry Residency Program. In other words, my heart beats maroon and gold, and it's an honor to address you today. I'm a member of the U of M Psychiatry faculty, and I carry currently the role of Vice Chair for Education, and I am privileged in the service of patients with mental illness and their families in collaboration with my deeply appreciated Fairview team members. I'm proud of my training in education, which has consistently acknowledged none of us are perfect, although we strive to be. As a mother, I cannot begin to imagine the heartache suffered by Mary Weiss. Her grief and the grief of Dan Markinson's friends is real and legitimate. My colleagues and I hope to work in every way possible to honor those lost to suicide by better understanding and teaching the next generation why this might happen and how to decrease the risk of similar tragedies. On behalf of my colleagues in the department, I would like to share with you that we are engaged in a dedicated process of self-reflection, incorporation of the insight from the external review, and taking steps to further collaborate with members of the community and other disciplines. We are open to and embrace this process and hope to move forward while also keeping in mind that the knowledge obtained from clinical research is essential to achieve our ideals of optimal treatment. We care, we seek to understand, and we're listening.
Rochelle Moen.
Hello, I'm Rochelle Moen, and I'm a licensed psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry. And I've been here a long time. I've been in the department for 23 years. And I have been very committed to working with the underserved and difficult to work with populations, including patients with borderline personality disorder and first episode of psychosis and schizophrenia patients. I run a dialectical behavioral therapy treatment program for persons who are in tremendous emotional pain, who are chronically suicidal and self-harm. I am fortunate to work also with the families of first episodes of psychosis patients. I'm here to let you know how deeply and passionately I believe in our continued development of sound scientific research as the way to increase the knowledge of mental illness so that the associated pain and suffering can be decreased. As a member of the Department of Psychiatry, I'm here to listen, take guidance, and to make Minnesota proud through our advanced clinical care, our evidence-based treatment programs, our educating our doctors in such tremendous ways, and our research, the important areas of psychiatry. There are some really good things happening in the Department of Psychiatry that we're not talking about. I'd like to take a moment to give you one example. In the last 6 years, my colleagues have developed the first episode of psychosis program, an evidence-based program, a seamless program, which has a continuum of care from inpatient care to moving to day treatment and partial hospitalization, that has evidence-based treatment with cognitive remediation in outpatient groups. It's a very, very scary time for these patients and their families. It also includes, as the family mentioned earlier, ongoing family interventions and educating families, all based on research. So I want you to clearly know that I am working with a team of very dedicated faculty who are committed and dedicated to excellence in patient care, excellent research, teaching, and educating future physicians. It's a tremendous group, and we have fantastic residents. I want us to be engaged in a constructive discussion on how we can move forward. Thank you very much.
Nikki Jerry.
Hi, my name is Nikki Jerry. I am a PhD candidate here, and my son played football here, and he graduated here and is gainfully employed. And I'm an IRB member, and I'm also a nurse at Fairview. And I am responsible for keeping patients safe. I objected to the recruitment of Dan Markinson into the drug study. I made the objection directly to Dr. Steve Olson. Didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter what concerns were expressed. I saw patterns of dismissal. RNs came to me and said they were frightened to speak out. They feared retaliation. They were afraid of losing their jobs. Guess what? You want the RNs to speak out when they see a problem in research and clinical care, when they see dangerous situations, when patients' safety and lives are at stake. You want the RNs to prevent those problems, and we are great at preventing problems. Americans have been asked to rate the honesty and ethics of various professions annually since 1990. Nurses have topped the list each year since we were first introduced and included in 1999. The only exception was 2001, when firefighters were included in response to their work during and after the 9/11 attacks. When I continued to worry about safety, I met with a colleague who asked me to meet with Carolyn Wilson, co-president of the University of Minnesota Medical Center. The meeting was held on February 4th, 2014. I have continued to meet with hospital and university leaders. Responses are polite. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your time. This is the deal. I have reported possible serious HIPAA violations, patient safety concerns, and breaches of research protocols, and I have heard nothing back. What I have heard is all is well in the University of Minnesota, all is well at Fairview, all is well with research. The psychiatrist has saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. Surprise, others don't think we are doing so well. The legislative auditor, the external review panel, former Governor Arne Carlson, national and international scholars. After I was interviewed on Fox 9, I had over 300 people approach me. Most recently this morning, nurses, social workers, managers, physicians, thanking me for speaking out. Some were crying. Many are fearful of losing their jobs if they're seen talking with me. They are so afraid for the patients that they cannot do their jobs and keep patients safe. You have a great responsibility. I would hope if I was in your role and continued to hear the criticism, I would have gone online and looked at the documents in the public domain, the source documents. That is what I did. Those documents are truth, and the spinning from the university and Fairview is not. Again, if you are in the hospital for care or a clinical trial, you want an RN to speak out when something's not right. And you want to make sure that the culture of fear is taken care of, and the implementation team checking the box won't work. Thank you.
Craig Weinert.
Hello, my name is Craig Weiner, and I'm a full-time faculty in the medical school in the pulmonary and critical care division. I have reviewed the consultant's recommendations regarding the problems in clinical research that existed a decade ago, have continued to the present, and I think implementation of the recommendations will improve clinical trial safety. However, I've done NIH-funded clinical trials for 15 years at the university in patients that would also be considered a vulnerable population because I'm trying to improve care of seriously ill patients in intensive care units. I'm not here to cure skin rashes or hypertension. 20 to 30% of my patients will die within a week or two from their illness. These patients can deteriorate or die abruptly for unclear reasons. Should I consent the patient for a clinical trial, but if something happens, later to be accused that the patient was really too ill to understand what was going on? Should I consent the proxy, even though studies have shown that subjects and proxies disagree on enrollment about 25% of the time? And I know that proxies are in crisis themselves, emotionally overwhelmed, maybe sleep deprived. So can they really consent, especially if the treatment needs to start within hours, as is often the case for serious condition? I am concerned that people might believe that implementation of the IRB recommendations means that all uncertainty regarding consent and safety will be resolved. It will not be resolved. Life, medicine, and human suffering are not that simple. Patients in perfectly conducted clinical trials are going to get sick and die, sometimes for inexplicable reasons. This creates risk for investigators doing acute care research on seriously ill patients. With the relentless decline of the tenure system for medical school physicians who do clinical research, my fellow clinical researchers, many not on the tenure track, feel vulnerable to attacks from the tenured faculty within the medical school and university and from people in the community. Someone can always be blamed. A logical response for me is to stop conducting critical care patient research. In fact, I've already made a decision to enroll for my next trial at the Ohio State University, not the University of Minnesota Medical Center. Unless the Office of the Vice President for Research gains the confidence of clinical researchers that we are supported when doing high-risk, important research the right way, then the U motto of driven to discovery can be changed to driven from discovery. Thank you.
Arnie Carlson.
Thank you. In order for any management system to work effectively, it is essential that the independent system of oversight also function well. A weak oversight system invites management mischief and malperformance, and that is precisely what has happened here. Tragically, the Board of Regents has allowed itself to become an appendage of the Office of the President. Hence, there really is little oversight or check on management. This scandal could not have occurred if the Board of Regents had done their job. With that in mind, I am proposing a constitutional amendment that is designed to restore independence and broader ownership of oversight of our flagship university. Specifically, the governor would appoint, the legislature would appoint, the University Alumni Association would elect, and the people of Minnesota would elect. For far too long, there has been too much power concentrated in the office of the president without meaningful oversight and accountability. For instance, in 2006, you as board members were given copies of an audit from your own internal audit team. It flagged the fact that in the Department of Psychiatry, and I'm quoting, 39% of the staff did not believe that they would be protected from retaliation if they were to report a suspected violation. 9 years later, 2 additional reviews noted that this problem had grown into, quote, a culture of fear. Sadly, this gross neglect on the part of the Regents' oversight responsibility permitted endless mischief in the drug testing area. There truly was no accountability. Now the president and the board have submitted that new policies are the solution. Hence, the same management that permitted these violations and the corruption of the old policies will now be empowered with new ones. Apparently, no human being is accountable. If you will, please name one policy that permitted the public presentation of a complete falsehood and represented it as truth. Yet that is precisely what transpired when the Board of Regents and the management cooperated to violate the very mission statement of the university that you all pledged to uphold. And that is that the university is, quote, is dedicated to the advancement of learning and the search for truth. The bottom line is that the lure of big pharmaceutical money was greater than your commitment to the mission of our beloved university. You abandoned your responsibility.
Time.
And now you want to eliminate accountability. No, we must let the truth in. Thank you very much.
Mike Howard.
Thank you. My name is Mike Howard, and I'm a personal friend of Mary Weiss, the mother of Dan Markinson. Sadly, I'll pass on some news. At 5:20 tomorrow morning, it will be exactly 11 years that a priest and a policeman knocked on her door and told her son was dead. 11 years tomorrow morning. Here we are again, still here, and hopefully this is the year that's going to change it all. I'm going to take my 3 minutes and go quickly, and I'm not going to stress on things that have been covered many, many times over. But let me just make a point. The university, Dr. Kaler is attempting to make amends and apologize, which I credit him for. But right now, the University of Minnesota is killing this lady. She is in severe stroke recovery, and the last week, we have been getting inundated with supposedly Mary Weiss received a letter 10 years ago from a general counsel person at the university, and basically people have claimed that it's been fraudulently changed. And there's an affidavit in here that Mary Weiss signed, and this is exactly the letter she received in a University of Minnesota envelope and did nothing with it for 10 years. Never did a single thing with it. It was passed on to Professor Elliott a couple years ago, exactly as she received it. What he did with it is his business, but he never altered the letter. This is the letter she received. End of that story. But this keeps up to badger her over and over again. Here's the letters in case anybody's interested. We had to go to the Attorney General's office 3 times. She wrote 4 letters trying to get her son's documents from the university. 4 times. The Attorney General's office had to write the General Counsel, Dr. Stephen Olson, the study coordinator. It took all of this effort simply to get her dead son's records. And then they were never complete. And I'm mad. If you want to fix the problem, Dr. Kaler has said over and over again, above reproach. Make it a priority with your group and your commission to change how you deal with families that inadvertently or inexplicitly have issues with the university. Treat them like human beings. Mary Weiss has received 2 obnoxious phone calls this week. Well, you know why? Because the university posted on its website private data on her complaints to the medical board. We have a release that she signed saying only Dr. Stephen Olson or Dr. Charles Schultz could have access to that information. The medical board said under no circumstances could she ever.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleen Traxler.
I'm Colleen Traxler. I'm a member of the community, and I have 2 children whose lives depend on the world-class research and human subject studies undertaken by the University of Minnesota. One is a type 1 diabetic. The other has experienced marijuana-induced psychosis. Both deserve an equal chance to live a full and normal life. 3 years ago, we received the nightmare call every parent will never want to get when their son is off at college. Our son was in the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex, suffering from hallucinations and psychosis. We managed to get him home to Minnesota with 2 words of advice from the discharging psychiatrist, NAMI and Dr. Charles Schultz. Fortune did bring us to Dr. Charles Schultz, Nancy Lindquist, Dr. Michael O'Sullivan, the First Episode Clinic, and the education groups that is supported by these individuals. Nancy's very keen perception and proactive work with Dr. O'Sullivan at the clinic when our son was in a very critical state was not the level of care we received at the previous clinic, where in fact they refused to even see him and called us and told us that. I credit that moment as the turning point for our son's future. This amazing team has an incredible education component to their practice that helped us to understand what happened to our son, how we should support him, and most importantly, propelled us to move forward as a family with what appeared to be a dark, gray, and bleary future. Not only did we learn what happened to our son, we learned how prevalent mental illness is in the age group 17 to 27. In fact, while attending the sessions, each month new families appeared at the table, fraught with the same fear and anxiety we had experienced with our son. Parents struggled to comprehend what happened to their successful and intelligent child. We understood the pain and suffering they were going through, and we were there to help others, as others in these sessions helped us to gain valuable insight into our new reality. The number of new families added to the group each week further enforces the need for the University of Minnesota to continue to support clinical research for new and better treatments for these members of our families and society. The First Episode team's persistent work with parents and individuals in this situation is so unique, so important, and so worthy of your continued support at this institution. There's no other place where a family can take a family member experience psychosis for the first time and get the proper care and guidance in their recovery. Your employees are advocates to help people help themselves by gaining insight into mental illness, and they helped us along with many other families through a very tough time. Everything they are doing should be replicated throughout the country. This department is critical for these very fragile members of our families. We don't know what the future holds for our son, but thanks to the University of Minnesota, he is expected to graduate with a finance degree in December. He has an internship with a large financial organization.
Time.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to more research for both type 1 diabetes and mental illness.
Kathy Swanson.
Hello, my name is Kathy Swanson. I'm a member of the community, and I am a friend of Mary Weiss. Tomorrow is the 11-year anniversary of her son Dan Markinson's death. In these past 11 years, Mary has fought for some justice, some acknowledgement from those that treated Dan. She was met the whole way with stonewalling, denial, and outright fabrications of the truth. She was escorted out of buildings and was badmouthed by the staff of the U. The U repeatedly tried to denigrate the victim instead of ever listening to her complaints and doing any type of investigation. When Carl Elliott reviewed the case and also began to ask for an investigation, he too received that same treatment. The policy of the U seems to be that no one should ever question anything that they do, and if you do, retribution will be meted out. It is this behavior that both investigations found troubling. We, the people of Minnesota, are lucky that Mary never gave up her fight and that she has continued to push for 11 years. If she had stopped, no one would be doing any investigations. This is the sad state of this institution. In 2009, Dan's Law was passed to protect patients like Dan from the practices that were actively employed by the U Psychiatry Department. The state legislature recognized the problems and took steps to prevent it from happening again. But even this did not get the attention of the U's Board of Regents. What we need to do now is investigate how many other victims there were between May 2004 to the present.
to create a plan of corrective actions without talking to all the people that feel victimized is a plan to just please the media and to say the U is doing something. If you don't know all the issues and all the players, you cannot make the necessary steps to correct the problems. I no longer trust the U to take the right action when the same cast of characters are in place. My only hope is that the state will investigate the U Psychiatry Department and talk to all these other families that have issues. Only when all the dirty laundry is aired will we know the full scope of the problem. Thank you.
Terry Caraway.
I'm taking Terry Caraway's place. My name is Victoria Anderson. I'm a community member. I'm a former patient of the University of Minnesota in Fairview System, and I was a client of Dr. Stephen Olson. I was at this meeting a year ago to listen. I am here today to share. Let's rewind to the spring of 2009. I wasn't feeling well. I was in 6 significant major life changes. I wasn't coping well with these. They were very difficult, and I was using alcohol as a destructive coping mechanism. To help myself, I saw my doctor. He treated me for anxiety and depression. And then I referred myself to Hazelden twice. I got out of Hazelden April and May 2009. Fast forward to July 2009. Despite my efforts to help myself, I still was not feeling well. I was vulnerable, scared, alone, and isolated. So I followed your website instructions and called 911. I was in crisis. What I received was the label of suicidal ideation, an opinion that I was going to harm myself or others, and a swift one-day diagnosis of bipolar disorder, never identified 2 months prior through the experts at the best treatment center in the country. During the next 2 years, I was exploited as only a person in the system of mental health can be. I was locked up involuntarily for approximately 2.5 months at Fairview. I was medicated against my will, having been withdrawn from my commitment psychiatrist from all medications. I was given dangerous drug combinations, approximately 16 of them. And I was threatened with involuntary commitment, and in fact was committed 2 times, 2 years, got stay of commitments. I was threatened with a Jarvis order with 5 people to hold me down, and I was threatened with Anoka State Hospital. My family was told I didn't want to see them when I was locked away in a room because of an overdose of a dangerous cocktail. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't talk, I was drooling. They closed the door for 10 days. Bruises on my body from falling into the wooden bed. I saw numerous doctors.
Thank you. Time's up.
Let her finish.
Time's up. Thank you.
To be continued. Time's up.
Patrice Nurad.
I didn't know if I'd get here in time, so I didn't prepare a perfect speech. But I've been a consultant. Well, my name is Patrice Nurad. My doctorate is on the mental health system here in Minnesota. It's not focused on the Dan Markinson case, but a number of the issues that are inherent in our mental health system here in Minnesota are prevalent, very prevalent, in the Markinson case here at the university. I also need to say that I spoke on Monday at the meeting because I've been a consultant here to the University of Minnesota. Probably never again after these conversations, but that's okay. I discovered years ago under different leadership the same issues that are inherent now. You are functioning at the lowest level of systemic functionality. I don't know why you can't learn when it's supposed to be a learning organization. It's been an organization that cannot hear, it cannot listen, and it does not make the changes it needs in significant areas in order to improve its practices, to become the model. I've heard that repetitively, and I was part of that. Let us become the best model in this country. And I wanted to help with that. That's why I was here as a consultant. But I've seen no changes in this, and it concerns me greatly, you know, after all these years. Because like I said, it was under different leadership, but it seems to be repeating itself. There's a severe lack of oversight. The legislative auditor suggested that the ombudsman for the state of Minnesota be part of a oversight process into the program here. It doesn't appear that the legislature, I don't know if who's suggesting, but it doesn't appear the legislature bought that one. But you need somebody outside, I'm sorry. As many people have said, you lack inclusivity on your committees, so it's the same people that are part of the problem that you're trying to have solve the problem. Severe issues. These are systemic issues. And you must go to the root of the systemic issues that you have. You have a management school. Aren't they teaching systems there? Whole systems thinking? Because that's not what's happening here. It's very fragmented, it's not good systems thinking. And there's been a severe abuse of power. When someone comes to this university and says there's an issue, whether it's your own faculty or a consultant, and nothing gets done, 11 years? Really 11 years. And then they go back and sue this poor woman. That's an abuse of positional power. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy Raymond.
Hello. I want to thank the Board of Regents for holding this public forum. My name is Nancy Raymond, and I'm a professor in the Department of Psychiatry. I also serve as the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs for the medical school. But perhaps most importantly for this discussion, I have a family member with a serious and persistent mental illness. My brother has schizophrenia. When we were children, he was a happy, active boy, and we had a very close relationship, akin to the relationship my children have with each other. In his late teens, my brother had his first psychotic break, though at the time, my parents didn't realize what was happening. A few years later, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and started on the antipsychotics that were available at that time. Sorry about that. The medication managed to control his hallucinations and delusions, but he was left with what I later learned were the negative symptoms of schizophrenia: lack of ability to express emotions, monotone speech, few gestures, and a seeming lack of interest in other people, or an ability to experience pleasure, and a decreased ability to act spontaneously. My brother became very reclusive and did not welcome visits. I saw him seldom, and when I did, he was not really very communicative. Eventually, as newer antipsychotics became available to treat these negative symptoms of schizophrenia, my brother was switched to one of the newer medications and began to improve. He started to come to family events, spent more time with friends, and even joined a baseball team run by a local community support program. Now he never misses family events. He has a relationship with my kids that I never thought would be possible, and my children were given the gift of learning how to relate to someone who interacts with people in a different way than most of the adults they encounter in their daily lives. These changes were made possible because clinical trials were conducted on compounds developed by pharmaceutical companies, and the trials were in large part funded by pharmaceutical companies. Much of the research was conducted by faculty at leading research institutions across the country, such as the University of Minnesota. I am very proud to be a member of a department that is made up of faculty who have dedicated their careers to partnering with parents and families to treat and study disorders like schizophrenia, fetal alcohol syndrome, eating disorders, drug and alcohol addictions, and many other mental illnesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of my colleagues, I want to thank you for participating in this public hearing. We've finished the session. We appreciate your input, and the meeting is adjourned.